night it happened was supposed to be ordinary. That was the problem. It was the night before everyone else had plans, and I didn't. I was 34 years old, living alone in a small rented house on the outskirts of a quiet town in Oregon. It wasn't dangerous, it wasn't isolated. It was the kind of place people described as peaceful, which usually meant nothing ever happened there. That evening, my phone kept lighting up with group messages. Friends talking about dinners, parties, places they were heading to. Someone asked what I was doing that night. I typed back, "Staying in." I added a smiley face so it wouldn't sound sad. In truth, I was relieved. I wanted a quiet night. I didn't want to be around people. I didn't realize how noticeable that choice would be. By 7:30 p.m., it was already dark outside. I locked the door out of habit, not fear. I heated up leftovers, ate at the kitchen counter, and left the TV on for background noise. Outside, the street was still. A few houses had lights on, others were already dark. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. Around 9 p.m., I turned off most of the lights and left one lamp on in the living room. I liked the house dim. It made it feel calmer, smaller. I curled up on the couch with a blanket and scrolled through my phone, half watching whatever was on TV. I remember thinking how quiet everything felt. Too quiet, maybe, but I brushed the thought away. At 9:42, my phone buzzed with a notification from my door camera. Motion detected. I frowned and opened the app. The porch was empty. Just my front door, the steps, and the soft glow of the porch light. I assumed it was a passing car or the wind. I closed the app and muted the TV, listening for a moment. Nothing. The house was silent again. 10 minutes later, the alert went off again. This time, when I opened the camera feed, something felt off immediately. The porch light was on, but the shadows looked different, deeper, like something was blocking part of the light. I leaned closer to my phone, my heart starting to beat faster. At the very edge of the frame, just outside the camera's view, there was a shape, not moving, not clear enough to identify, just there. I told myself it was nothing. Shadows do strange things at night. I closed the app, but I didn't unmute the TV. I stood up and checked the front door lock. It was secure. I checked the back door too. Locked. I felt silly for being nervous in my own home. At 10:07 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't the camera. It was a text from an unknown number. "You decided to stay home." My stomach tightened instantly. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. I typed back, "Who is this?" The response came quickly. Someone who noticed. I felt a chill run through me. I hadn't told anyone nearby that I was staying in. I hadn't posted anything online. I typed, "Wrong number." A few seconds passed before the reply came. "No, your lights are on." I slowly turned my head toward the front window. The lamp behind me cast a faint glow onto the glass. Anyone outside could see straight in. My heart started to race. I stood up and turned the lamp off. The room fell into darkness, lit only by the TV screen. My phone buzzed again. That's better. My hands began to shake. I backed away from the window and walked down the hallway, locking my bedroom door even though I hadn't heard anything inside the house. I sat on the bed, staring at my phone, trying to make sense of what was happening. I didn't want to panic. I didn't want to assume the worst. It was just a text, a coincidence. That's what I told myself. At 10:31, the door camera alert chimed again. I hesitated before opening it. When the feed loaded, my breath caught in my throat. Someone was standing on my porch. Not directly in front of the door, but off to the side, just enough to stay partially out of view. I couldn't see their face. Just a dark outline. They weren't knocking. They weren't moving. They were just standing there. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to scare you. Tears pricked at my eyes. I typed, "Please leave." The reply came almost instantly. "I will. I just wanted to see if you were really alone." Before I could respond, the camera feed froze. When it refreshed, the porch was empty. The person was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just the quiet night pressing in around the house. I sat there for a long time, my heart racing, listening for any sign that they were still nearby. Nothing happened. Eventually, I convinced myself it was over. A prank. Someone trying to mess with me because they knew I was home alone. I told myself to calm down. At 11:18 p.m., my phone buzzed one last time. This is just the first night. That was when it hit me. Tonight wasn't special. It was just the night before everyone else was busy. And whoever had been watching me knew exactly when I'd be alone again. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my bed with the lights off, my phone face down on the mattress, listening to the house breathe around me. Every sound felt amplified, the heater clicking on, the faint creak of wood settling, the distant rush of a car somewhere far away. I checked the door camera over and over. The porch stayed empty. Still, I didn't relax. By morning, exhaustion made everything feel unreal. I told myself I'd overreacted. That fear had filled in the blanks. People did strange things at night. Maybe it was a prank, a coincidence. I went through the day on autopilot, forcing myself to work, to talk, to act normal. I didn't tell anyone. Saying it out loud felt like inviting it back. That evening, another eve, another night where everyone else was busy, I came home early again. I told myself I wouldn't let last night control me. I turned on every light. I kept the TV loud. I cooked dinner and ate at the table instead of the couch. I wanted the house to look alive. Occupied, unavailable. At 7:56 p.m., my phone buzzed. "You're trying to be louder tonight." My chest tightened. I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't replied to the last message. I blocked the number immediately. Seconds later, a new message arrived from a different number. That won't help. I felt a rush of heat in my face, anger mixed with fear. I typed, "Leave me alone." The reply came after a pause. "I will, when I'm done." I would nod. I turned the TV off and listened. The house felt too quiet again. I checked the front door. Locked. Deadbolt engaged. Back door locked. Window secure. I paced the living room, phone in my hand, debating whether to call someone. I didn't want to sound dramatic. I didn't know what I'd say. At 8:24, the door camera alert sounded. Motion detected. My heart pounded as I opened the app. The porch light illuminated the steps, and a small object placed neatly in front of the door. A paper bag, folded at the top. No writing, no delivery label. My phone buzzed. I brought something. I stayed where I was. I didn't go near the door. I didn't speak. I watched the camera feed, waiting for movement. Nothing. The bag sat there, unmoving. Minutes passed. The house remained silent. Finally, I called the non-emergency police line and explained what was happening, my voice shaking despite my efforts to stay calm. They told me an officer would come by when available and advised me not to open the door. While I waited, my phone buzzed again. "You don't have to be scared. I'm not here to hurt you." I laughed once short and hollow. If that were true, why watch? Why text? Why wait for nights like this when no one else was around? I muted my phone and sat on the couch, staring at the door like it might open on its own. At 9:11, headlights swept across the living room wall. A patrol car pulled up. Relief hit me so hard my legs felt weak. The officer knocked, identified himself, and stepped back. He examined the bag with gloves, then opened it carefully. Inside was a single object, a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me without unfolding it. I opened it with shaking fingers. 3 words, written carefully in dark ink. "I see you." The officer took photos, asked questions, checked the street and the surrounding yards. No one was found. No neighbors had seen anything. No cars idling nearby. He told me they'd file a report and advised me to stay with someone if I could. When he left, the house felt emptier than before. I tried to keep myself busy. I cleaned. I reorganized drawers. I kept the TV on. Midnight came and went without fireworks on my street. At 12:09 a.m., my phone vibrated again. Another new number. "Happy Eve." I blocked it instantly. Another message came through. "I like nights like this." That was when the power went out. The lights died without warning. The TV went black. The house fell into darkness, so complete it stole my breath. Outside, the streetlights were out too. The neighborhood disappeared. My phone buzzed, the only light in the room. Now it's quiet. I ran to the bedroom and locked the door, my hands shaking. I called 911 and whispered my address, telling the dispatcher someone was harassing me and the power had gone out. She told me officers were on the way, but warned outages could slow response times. Outside, I heard footsteps on gravel, slow, unhurried, stopping near the porch. Then a knock, gentle, controlled. My phone buzzed. "I told you I'd come back." I pressed myself into the corner of the room, tears streaming down my face, whispering everything I heard to the dispatcher. The knock came again. Once, twice. Then the doorknob turned. It didn't open, the lock held. The footsteps moved away, circling the house. I stayed silent, shaking, listening to every sound. Sirens finally cut through the dark. Red and blue light flickered through the cracks in the blinds. Outside, footsteps ran. A car engine started and disappeared into the night. Minutes later, officers knocked and identified themselves. When I opened the door, my knees nearly gave out. They searched the area but found no one. The power came back on shortly after, as if nothing had happened. One officer looked at me and said quietly, "This doesn't feel random." I moved out a few days later. I didn't wait. I didn't argue with myself. I packed essentials and left. I don't stay alone on eves anymore. I don't post my plans. I don't answer unknown numbers. Because the scariest part wasn't the knock. It was how easily he blended into nights when everyone else was busy, and how patient he was, waiting for the next one. The night before he was supposed to leave town, I stayed home alone on purpose. Everyone else had plans, dinners, drinks, late nights out. I told myself I needed the quiet. I was 31, recently separated, and renting a small duplex on a street that went dark early. The kind of place where nothing happened after sunset because there was nowhere to go. I locked the door before it was fully dark, something I'd started doing without thinking about it. Not because I was afraid, because it felt responsible. I cooked pasta, ate half of it, and left the rest in the sink. I turned the TV on low and sat on the floor with my back against the couch, scrolling through my phone. Outside, the street stayed quiet. No cars, no footsteps, just the faint hum of someone's heater kicking on down the block. At 8:19 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You didn't go out tonight." I frowned. I assumed it was spam, or a wrong number. I typed back, "Who is this?" The response came almost immediately. Someone who expected the house to be empty. My stomach tightened. I glanced toward the front window. The blinds were closed, but light still leaked through the edges. I stood up and turned the lamp off. The room fell into a softer darkness, lit mostly by the TV. My phone buzzed again. "You don't need the lights." My hands started to shake. I told myself to stop overthinking. Anyone could guess. I typed, "Wrong number." The reply took a few seconds longer. "No, I watched you park." I froze. I hadn't seen anyone when I got home. I walked quietly to the door and checked the lock. It was secure, deadbolt engaged. I checked the back door, locked. The windows, all closed. I felt ridiculous for being nervous, but the feeling didn't go away. At 8:41, the door camera alert chimed. Motion detected. I opened the app, bracing myself. The porch was empty, just the steps and the cone of light from the porch bulb. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Probably a car passing. I closed the app and sat back down. The alert went off again 2 minutes later. This time, when the feed loaded, I noticed something new. A car parked across the street, just far enough away to look normal, but I didn't recognize it. The engine wasn't running. The headlights were off. It hadn't been there earlier. My phone buzzed. "That's not your neighbor's car." My heart started pounding. I stood up slowly and moved away from the window. I typed, "Stop texting me." The response came almost instantly. "I will, after tonight." I locked my bedroom door, even though I hadn't heard anything inside the house. I sat on the bed, phone in my hand, trying to decide what to do. Calling the police felt extreme. Nothing had happened. No threats, no knocking, just texts. Just someone knowing too much. At 9:07, the car across the street turned its lights on briefly, then off again, like a signal. My phone buzzed. "You see it," I whispered. "This isn't funny," even though no one could hear me. I typed, "Leave me alone." The reply took longer this time. "You're safer when you answer." That made my chest feel tight. I muted the phone and tried to focus on anything else. I turned the TV volume up. I paced the room. I told myself to breathe. 10 minutes passed. Nothing happened. I started to relax just a little. Then I heard footsteps. Not inside the house. Outside. On gravel. Slow. Deliberate. Stopping near the front steps. I held my breath and listened. My phone vibrated in my hand. "Don't panic." The footsteps didn't approach the door. They stayed just out of reach, like someone standing there, listening, waiting. I opened the door camera feed again. The porch was empty, but the shadow at the edge of the frame was darker now, closer. My phone buzzed. "I don't want to scare you." Tears pricked at my eyes. I typed, "Please go away." The reply came immediately. I just need to be sure you're alone." Before I could respond, the camera feed froze. When it refreshed, the porch was empty. The car across the street was gone. The street looked exactly the way it always did. Quiet, normal. I sat there, shaking, listening for any sound. Nothing happened. Minutes passed. Then, half an hour. I started to convince myself it was over. A prank. Someone bored. Someone trying to get a reaction. At 10:12, my phone buzzed one last time. Tomorrow night will be easier. That was when it clicked. Tomorrow night was the eve of his departure. The night everyone assumed I wouldn't be home. The night no one would check in. I stared at the message until the screen went dark, realizing I hadn't been chosen at random. I had been noticed. I didn't turn the lights off that night. I left every lamp on, every room glowing in a way that made the house feel exposed instead of safe. I sat on the couch with my phone in my hand, replaying the messages over and over, trying to convince myself there was a rational explanation. Someone guessing, someone bluffing, but the details were too specific. The car, the way I parked, the timing, it felt deliberate. At 10:38 p.m., my phone buzzed again. New number. "You're trying to stay awake." My chest tightened. I hadn't moved. I hadn't said anything. I typed back, "Stop contacting me." The reply came slower this time, like the sender was thinking, "I will, soon." I stood up and checked the locks again. Front door, deadbolt secure, back door locked, windows closed. Everything was the way it should be. Still, the feeling of being watched clung to me. I muted my phone and turned the TV volume up, hoping noise would make the house feel less hollow. At 11:02, the door camera alert sounded. Motion detected. I froze. Slowly, I opened the app. The porch light illuminated the steps and someone standing just off to the side. I couldn't see their face, only the outline of their body and the shape of their shoulders. They weren't knocking. They weren't pacing. They were standing still, like they knew I was watching. My phone buzzed, overriding the mute. "I didn't want to surprise you." I felt tears well in my eyes. I typed, "Please leave." The reply came almost instantly. "I will. I just needed to see you were really alone." The figure shifted slightly, then stepped backward, disappearing into the darkness beyond the porch light. The camera feed stayed on. No movement, no sound. I sat there shaking, my heart racing, listening for anything out of place. Nothing happened. After several minutes, I closed the app and tried to breathe. I told myself it was over. At 11:41, the power flickered. The lights dimmed, then came back, then dimmed again. My heart started pounding. I stood up, my phone clutched in my hand. The power went out completely, seconds later. The TV went black. The lamps died. The house fell into darkness so deep it felt physical. My phone buzzed, the only light in the room. This is better. I felt sick. I ran to the bedroom and locked the door, my hands shaking so badly I struggled with the latch. I dialed 911 and whispered my address, telling the dispatcher someone had been harassing me and the power had gone out. She told me officers were on the way, but warned outages could slow response times. Outside, I heard footsteps. Not rushing, not sneaking. Slow steps on gravel, stopping near the front porch. I pressed my back against the bedroom wall, my knees pulled to my chest. My phone buzzed again. "You don't have to hide." I whispered to the dispatcher that someone was outside. She told me to stay where I was and keep the door locked. I listened as the footsteps moved closer, stopping just outside the front door. Then came a knock. Gentle, controlled. Not loud enough to be alarming, loud enough to be intentional. My phone buzzed. "I told you I'd come back." I squeezed my eyes shut, tears streaming down my face. I whispered every sound to the dispatcher, the knock, the silence afterward, the way it felt like someone was listening. The knock came again. Once. Twice. Then, the doorknob turned. It didn't open. The lock held. Outside, the person exhaled loudly, frustrated now. Footsteps moved away from the door, circling the house. I heard them on the side yard gravel. Then, at the back door. The handle rattled once. Twice. Harder this time. My phone buzzed. "You changed the locks." My heart dropped. I hadn't told anyone. The dispatcher told me officers were close, just a few minutes out. I clutched the phone and tried to stay silent, listening as the footsteps moved away again. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. No footsteps, no knocking, just silence. Seconds passed. Then a minute. I barely breathed. Then I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder. Red and blue light flashed faintly through the bedroom curtains. Outside, hurried footsteps ran across gravel. A car engine started and sped away. The dispatcher told me officers had arrived and instructed me to stay inside until they knocked and identified themselves. When the knock came, it sounded different, firm, authoritative. "Police," a voice called. I unlocked the bedroom door and walked down the hallway on unsteady legs. The officers searched the house and the yard. They found fresh scuff marks near the back door and footprints leading away from the property toward the road. No one was found. One officer looked at me carefully and said, "This wasn't random. Someone knew you were alone tonight." I didn't stay in that house much longer. I packed a bag and stayed with a friend the next morning. A week later, I moved. New place, new routines, new locks. I changed my number and stopped answering unknown calls. 2 weeks after I moved, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "I hope you found somewhere safer." I blocked it immediately. Then another number messaged. "I told you I'd leave." After that, the messages stopped. But some nights, when I'm alone and everything is quiet, I still think about that eve, the night before he was supposed to leave town, the night he decided to come back instead. Because the scariest part wasn't that he stood outside my house. It was how carefully he chose the night no one else would be paying attention. The night before I was completely alone, I stayed awake longer than I should have. It was the last evening before my sister moved out. She had been staying with me temporarily after her breakup, sleeping in the spare room, filling the house with small, comforting noises I didn't even realize I relied on. That afternoon, she packed her final suitcase, hugged me in the driveway, and promised to call when she got to her new place. When her car disappeared down the street, the house felt different. Not quieter, emptier, like it knew something I didn't. I was 33 years old and living alone for the first time in years. My house sat at the edge of a residential area in upstate New York, where the streets curved instead of running straight, and the trees stood close enough together to block most of the moonlight. It wasn't isolated, but at night it felt like it could be, especially when there were no other cars parked outside. I told myself I'd go to bed early. I didn't. I cleaned the kitchen, even though it was already clean. I checked the locks twice. I left the TV on low volume just to have another presence in the room. Outside, the street stayed still. No headlights. No voices. Just darkness and the faint rustle of branches when the wind shifted. Around 9:40 p.m., I noticed the light. It wasn't inside my house. It was coming from the one across the street. That house had been empty for months. The owners had moved out in the spring, and no one new had moved in yet. No lights, no cars, no signs of life. I had gotten used to it being dark every night. That's why the single light glowing behind one of the front windows caught my attention immediately. I stood at my living room window, staring at it. The light wasn't flickering. It wasn't moving. It looked like someone had walked in and flipped it on without bothering to close the curtains. I checked the time. 9:43 p.m. I told myself it was probably a realtor or a contractor stopping by late. Still, something about it felt wrong. No car in the driveway, no sound, just that steady glow. I stepped back from the window and went into the kitchen, telling myself not to be dramatic. When I came back a few minutes later, the light was still on. Brighter now, as my eyes adjusted to the dark. I felt an uncomfortable pressure in my chest, like I was being watched. At 10:01, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You noticed the light." My stomach dropped. I stared at the message, my fingers cold. I hadn't told anyone about the house. I typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came almost immediately. "Your neighbor. For tonight." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I typed, "That house is empty." The response took a few seconds longer this time. "Not anymore." I turned my living room lamp off without thinking. The room plunged into darkness, lit only by the glow from across the street. My phone buzzed again. "You don't need the lights." My hands started shaking. I backed away from the window and locked the front door, then the back door, even though I hadn't heard anything outside. I checked the windows, making sure the locks were secure. Everything looked normal. Too normal. At 10:17, the light across the street moved. Not turned off. Moved. It shifted from one room to another, like someone walking through the house with a lamp or flipping switches as they went. I watched from behind my curtain, my heart pounding. My phone buzzed again. "You should close the blinds." I did. I sat on the couch with my knees pulled up, phone in my hands, trying to decide what to do. Calling the police felt ridiculous. Someone had turned a light on. Someone had texted me. Nothing illegal, nothing concrete. Still, the feeling of being singled out wouldn't go away. At 10:39, I heard gravel crunching, not across the street, in my driveway. I froze, listening. The sound stopped, then started again, slower this time. Footsteps. My phone buzzed. I didn't want to cross when you were watching. Tears filled my eyes. I whispered, "Please stop," even though I knew no one could hear me. I checked the door camera with shaking hands. The porch was empty. The driveway looked dark and still, but at the edge of the frame, just beyond the camera's view, a shadow lingered. My phone buzzed again. I'm not inside. That didn't make me feel better. I locked my bedroom door and sat on the floor, my back against the bed, listening. The house felt too quiet, like it was waiting. Outside, the light across the street finally went out. My phone buzzed one last time. "Tomorrow, it'll just be you." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Tomorrow was the first night I'd be completely alone, and whoever had been watching me knew exactly when that would be. I didn't move for a long time after that last message. I sat on the bedroom floor with my back against the bed, my phone resting in my lap, listening to the house. It wasn't making any unusual noises. No creaks, no footsteps. Just the quiet hum of appliances settling into the night. That almost made it worse. Silence left too much room for imagination. I told myself I was being paranoid, that someone was playing a cruel joke, maybe a neighbor who'd noticed my sister leave and decided to mess with me. I tried to believe that. I checked the door camera again. The porch was empty. The driveway was empty. The street looked exactly the way it always did. Dark, still, harmless. I stayed on the floor until my legs went numb. Eventually, exhaustion crept in. I got into bed without turning on the light and stared at the ceiling, my phone face down beside me. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember waking up suddenly, my heart racing, convinced I'd heard something. The clock on my phone read 12:38 a.m. I lay still, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then I heard a soft sound from somewhere in the house. Not loud enough to be alarming, just enough to be noticeable, like a door being opened slowly and caught before it could creak. My chest tightened. I held my breath and strained to hear more. A few seconds later, there was another sound. Footsteps. Not heavy, not rushed. Slow, careful steps moving through the hallway. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping I was imagining it, hoping it was the house settling. But the footsteps continued, stopping briefly, then starting again, moving closer. My phone buzzed. "You fell asleep." My heart felt like it was going to burst. I grabbed the phone, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I didn't reply. I didn't even open the message. I slid out of bed and locked the bedroom door as quietly as I could, my breath shallow and fast. Outside the door, the footsteps stopped. I pressed my ear against the wood, my entire body tense. For a moment, everything was silent again. Then someone exhaled on the other side of the door, slow, deliberate, close enough that I could hear it clearly. "You don't need to be scared," a voice said softly. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it sounded almost reassuring, like someone trying to calm a child. "I told you I wouldn't rush." Tears streamed down my face. I slid down onto the floor and hugged my knees to my chest, trying to make myself smaller. My phone buzzed again, lighting up the dark room. I just wanted to see what it felt like when you were really alone. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers and pressed the phone to my ear, whispering my address as soon as the dispatcher answered. I told her someone was inside my house. She asked if I could see them. I said no. She asked where I was. I said my bedroom, door locked. She told me officers were on the way and to stay on the line. Outside the door, the person shifted their weight. I could hear fabric brushing against the door frame. They didn't try the handle. They didn't knock. They just stood there, listening. The dispatcher kept talking, telling me to breathe, to stay with her. My phone buzzed again. "You called someone." I felt sick. I hadn't said anything out loud except in whispers. There was no way they should have known. I whispered this to the dispatcher, my voice breaking. She told me help was close. Just a few more minutes. From somewhere in the house, I heard a drawer open, then another, the sound of someone touching my things, moving through my space like they belonged there. The footsteps retreated down the hallway, slow and unhurried. I listened as they moved into the living room, then the kitchen. Every sound felt too intimate, too personal. My phone buzzed again. "You keep everything very neat." I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from sobbing. The dispatcher asked me what I could hear. I whispered everything. She told me to stay locked in, no matter what. Then, suddenly, the house went quiet again. No footsteps, no drawers, no voice. Seconds passed, then a minute. I barely breathed. I wondered if they had left, if they'd gotten what they wanted. Then, red and blue light flashed faintly through my bedroom window. Sirens cut through the night, loud and unmistakable. Outside the door, someone cursed under their breath. Footsteps ran down the hallway, no longer careful. I heard the back door slam open, then the sound of someone crashing through the brush behind the house. The dispatcher told me officers had arrived and to stay put until they identified themselves. When the knock came, it was firm and authoritative. "Police!" a voice called. I unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway, my legs shaking so badly I nearly fell. 2 officers stood inside the house, weapons drawn, scanning every room. They searched the house thoroughly, every closet, every room. The back door was unlocked. Muddy footprints led from the kitchen to the door and out into the yard. No one was found. The officers stayed with me until morning. They told me it didn't look random, that someone had likely been watching the house for a while. One of them said quietly, "They knew exactly when you'd be alone." I didn't stay there another night. I moved out within a week. I changed my number. I changed my routine. I stopped staying up late. Even now, years later, I still think about that night, the night before I was completely alone. The night someone decided that meant I was available. Because the most terrifying part wasn't that someone broke in. It was that they waited until no one else was supposed to be there.